Good evening. Welcome to Commonweal in Conversation, the magazine's virtual seminar series. My name is Miles Doyle. I'm a special projects editor at the magazine and your host for the evening. I'm very excited to introduce tonight's seminar, Becoming Conflict Resilient, Tools for Building a Synodal Church. And I am truly honored to introduce tonight's featured speaker, Bob Bordone, an internationally recognized expert, author, and teacher in negotiation, conflict resolution, mediation facilitation, and conflict resilience, the subject of his outstanding new book, which is available where books are sold, and which, by the way, is already a national bestseller just a few weeks since its release. As a founder and principal of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute, Bob consults with C-suite executives, government officials, and leaders at universities and across a wide range of industries to help them navigate their toughest conflicts and negotiations. He is currently a senior fellow at Harvard Law School, and he previously served on the full-time faculty there for more than 20 years as the Thaddeus R. Beal Clinical Professor of Law and as the director and founder of the Harvard Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program. He is also a member of the advisory board of the Paulist Fathers National Initiative on Toxic Polarization and a member of the Catholic Common Ground Initiative board. In short, Bob is a quintessential Commonweal Catholic, intelligent, faithful, curious, and committed to the common good, or at the very least, he is committed to making good behavior more common in our politics, workplace, and church, and in our most important relationships. Joining Bob tonight is Commonweal Executive Director Ellen Koneck. Before leading Commonweal, Ellen served as an adjunct lecturer in Catholic Studies at Sacred Heart University, an acquisition editor at Anselm Academic, a board member at Commonweal, and most recently the head writer at Springtide Research Institute. She earned her master's degree in religion at Yale Divinity School and sits on the advisory board at Liturgical Press. She regularly gives presentations and appears on podcasts to discuss the emerging religious landscapes in the United States, including on issues of polarization in the church and wider society, a major theme in Bob's book, Conflict Resilience. On a personal note, I can say with total confidence that Ellen, as our executive director, is particularly adept practitioner of both conflict mediation and conflict resilience. Tonight, after a brief presentation from Bob about conflict resilience in the Synodal Church, he and Ellen will discuss how we, you and I, and communities of Catholics here and around the world can start to realize Pope Francis' vision for a Synodal Church using many of the same tools Bob advocates for in his book. Throughout the Synodal process, Commonweal has covered what Austin Ivory has described as the most significant attempt at renewal since the Second Vatican Council, with the primary question in mind: what will it mean for the Church? As Catholicism slowly moves in the direction of a more communal, participatory, and missionary church, we trust tonight's conversation will help Catholics, laity, and clergy alike start to find our way there together, especially in the difficult and potentially contentious moments when we can't all agree on the best way forward. Without further ado, please welcome our featured speaker tonight, Bob Bordone.
Miles, thank you so much for that incredibly generous welcome and for this invitation to join you all tonight. And thanks for everyone who is joining from around the country and around the world. I have a somewhat daunting task. I'm going to try as best as I can to share with you some of the ideas in my book in about 20 to 25 minutes so that we have a really nice and ample time for conversation together. And hopefully that you will leave, because I always think it's a good outcome to leave with more questions than answers. So hopefully you could see these slides. Alan, yes, okay, good. The head nod is making me feel confident that you can do that. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a map for what I hope to do tonight, I want to spend some time telling you what I mean by conflict resilience, how it is different from conflict resolution, which is where I spent most of my professional life and continue to spend a lot of time thinking about and doing conflict resolution work. Hopefully share with you a bit about why I think it is important in general and also in particular for this synodal moment that Pope Francis has invited us to in the church. And in a very particular way, I think how important it is for the American church at this moment, as we see increasing polarization. Then maybe, probably this is where I'll spend the least amount of time, but since we promised some tools, I want to spend a little bit of time on the how, but hopefully invite you to think about going deeper in that in the book, and then make sure we have some time for some questions and some conversation. So let me just start by offering a definition for conflict resilience, because it is decidedly different from conflict resolution. So resilience is really that capacity to sit with conflict, to sit with the ongoing discomfort of our differences, meaning that we are fully present around those with whom we have different views, that we listen from a place of generosity and curiosity, but also that we are not avoidant, but that we actually share our own perspective and our own views with authenticity and with grace. And I should say that the idea for this book, which I was very lucky to do with a brain scientist, but before the brain scientist came in, the idea really came from a reflection of a shift in my own teaching at Harvard Law School. I started teaching there in the fall of 1998. And beginning, I'm going to say around 2015, 2016, around that time, I noticed a very perceptible shift in the kinds of engagements that I would see in the classroom. And as someone who at the time was on the admissions committee of the law school and had been on the admissions committee for quite a long time, I knew that we had worked very hard to bring a very diverse set of students, and I say diverse in every way, including politically, to our campus. And yet law school classrooms were becoming more and more boring. People were not saying very much. And there I was teaching conflict and conflict resolution and giving them skills, but people were not bringing their differences up. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, related to increasing polarization, to the role of social media, to the ease with which we could go to cocoons of comfort. Um, but that's when I really started to think that quite apart from skills, we need to rediscover this really important human capacity and leadership capacity to sit with the discomfort of disagreement. It's quite interesting because just about 2 months ago, I was reading the Harvard Crimson, and the front page had this headline. It said, "Most Harvard students do not feel comfortable sharing controversial opinions in class. Survey finds." This struck me as disturbing for all sorts of reasons, but the very headline itself perplexed me because the notion that the sharing of a controversial opinion would be comfortable seemed surprising to me and like not exactly what we should be aiming for. The very notion of sharing things that are uncomfortable, that are in conflict, that are controversial, may well be uncomfortable. And so it kind of made me feel like this idea of conflict resilience is really important. You know, our book starts with a quote from a speech that Frederick Douglass gave in 1857. His quote is as follows: "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the oceans without the awful roar of its many waters." That is to say that if we are going to hope to make any kind of meaningful change in the world, we have to be willing to enter into places of conflict. And I think that as Catholic Christians, we should see conflict as an invitation for connection, as the Holy Spirit at work in our church. And so the issue in my mind isn't whether we're going to have conflict, it's are we going to be able to enter into it with a listening and discerning spirit? Are we going to create environments where we can speak to each other with honesty and our own sense of what is true and real? And if we do that, right, to me, that's the invitation of being synodal. And so clearly, at least to me, this idea of conflict resilience matters for our church. I think I don't need to make strong arguments to say it also matters for our country and even for our day-to-day lives, like talking with family and friends. I'm going to focus primarily on church here today. The book is actually not a book primarily or even or even a little bit about church so much, although there's church examples in it. And I want to actually start with this. Back in 2023, the Apostolic Nuncio to the United States, Cardinal Pierre, sat down for an interview with Vatican Radio, and he really kind of talked about, really, I think, the importance of conflict resilience. He didn't use that word, but for this synodal moment in the church. So I want to just share a brief clip of that interview with all of you.
So the polarization in the church is a danger because it can kill also the church, and it puts the church very far away of what it should be. So even if people don't share your idea, but he's not your enemy. And this is the reason why the Holy Father invites him, has created, has launched this idea of synodality. The synodality is to work together through the method of dialogue, listening, discernment, and also listening to the Holy Spirit. So we are together. And of course, the logic of being together is that even in a family, you need to talk to the other in order to find the common ground, but also not to forget the concreteness of the reality.
So Cardinal Pierre puts forward his argument. I'm imagining that for at least some of the people who are listening right now, a case doesn't need to be made for why this matters, but I have done enough work on this topic to know that there are a lot of skeptics, and particularly skeptics who feel like if we can't find common ground, there is no point of entering into the conversation. So I want to spend at this point I disagree with. So I want to spend a few minutes making the case for what conflict resilience gets us, even if we end up in stark disagreement with very little common ground. And I think some of the benefits are consistent, right, with what we're called to as Catholic Christians and maybe just as humans. One is just a growth in empathy, a reduction in the kind of demonization that I think we see both going on in our country and also in our church. Because I think we are, as Catholics, we are invited to think about how can the church transform the culture. But in the US, we are starting to see the culture transforming the church. I want to actually share a non-church example of this. So I love to listen to podcasts. And back in February, I was listening to an episode of This American Life. And there was this story that to me is extremely powerful. And some of you, I think, will find this to be very sad. But I hope that maybe some of you can see this as a gift also of conflict resilience. So just to kind of set the stage, there's a reporter, his name is Zach Mack. And over the past few years, his father had become a conspiracy theorist. So much so that it was splitting the family apart. Um, Mom and dad were at the cusp of a divorce. They ultimately get a divorce. Daughter and dad barely talking. And Zach, the son, always had a quite distant relationship with his dad. But somehow at the beginning of 2024, they they reach this weird bet. And the bet is as follows. Um, they agree that at the end, they made this bet at the beginning of 2024, that at the end of 2024, dad says 10 things are going to happen. And if those 10 things do not happen, I give you $10,000. Otherwise, you give me $10,000. Here are the 10 things. 1, Barack Obama will be convicted of treason. 2, Joe Biden will be convicted of treason. 3, Nancy Pelosi will be convicted of treason. 4, Bill Clinton will be convicted of treason. 5, Hillary Clinton will be convicted of treason. 6, Donald Trump will be reinstated without an election. 7, Joe Biden will be removed from office. 8, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, will be removed from office. 9, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, will be removed from office. And 10, the U.S. will come under martial law. For those of you joining us from around the world, I have a news flash for you. None of these events happened in 2024, it turns out. And Dad agrees. None of them happened. However, he says they are all going to happen. He just got the time frame off. So I want to share with you a clip of this moment when the son realizes that the opinion is not shifting. Oh, and by the way, one of the son's commitments was to be in conversation with his dad about these issues throughout the entire year. So this is the clip I want to share with you.
As the conversation wound down, I let go of any notion that I could convince him of anything. I was finally ready to stop struggling and just accept the truth. I couldn't help him. I just want to say I do really appreciate. Oh man, sorry. It's been a hard year, man. I mean, I appreciate the conversations we've had all year. Like, I do feel, I don't know, I feel closer to you than I ever have, and I'm really sad about the state of this family. Yeah, but I do appreciate your openness, your willingness to. You never ducked a hard question.
No need to.
We made the bet a year ago, but I've waited a lot longer than that to have this conversation with him. All right, let's get a hug. As we stood there hugging, I just broke down.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So I share that because as harrowing and hard it is to listen to that, the mother divorces the dad. The daughter doesn't come home for the holidays. These two find some way to stay in relationship. And that I think is valuable, even though really hard. And just because I've now shared this 2 or 3 times, someone said to me, oh, but what about the money? The son takes the $10,000. Neither of them move off of their position. And I think there's value there. I want to share a clip from, some of you probably know of the bishop's program called Civilize It. This is also trying to get people in our church to have conversations with each other. And back last May, Bishop Barron, Bishop Flores, and Cardinal McElroy had an engagement with Gloria Purvis. And I want to share another really, I think, powerful clip about what conflict resilience gets us, even when there's not agreement on the issues. So let's just share that.
During this first Synodal dialogue session we had about 2 years ago, to build on what Bishop Flores was saying about communio listening. One of the universities helped us develop a fairly sophisticated note-taking system for the small group dialogues. And the theme of those questions was, what are your joys in the church? What are your and what are your hopes? So what was interesting was that the pastors and lay leadership told us in the parishes, when they had those small group meetings, they were in the context of a lot of prayer, that people left very exhilarated by it. But when they looked at the notes, people were saying diametrically opposed things in substance. The reason they left pleased with each other was they had encountered each other as disciples from their life of faith first. That was the context, the palpable context for what was going on. And so they could say things that were in substance different and conflicting, sometimes on visceral issues, but they could do so and people accepted it and actually felt good about the exchange because it was in the context of communio and a sense of discipleship. So the more we can build that up in our dialogues in the church and in society, I think the better off we are.
So I just love this, right? The like work of the transcripts are like these people completely don't agree. And yet we had this really good experience. It reminds me of this quote from St. John Paul II, where he says, affective collegiality precedes effective collegiality. this ability to sit with each other really matters. Now, I don't want to put outside, of course, the possibility for problem solving. I teach problem solving. I'm in favor of problem solving. I just want to say conflict resilience, we need to have that in order to do problem solving. We need to have that in order to be in dialogue. If we can't sit with the discomfort of our disagreement, then everything we're doing is lacking in integrity. So I want to just spend a few minutes on the how piece. The book goes into a lot of this in great detail. The first piece actually is around the power of a pause. There's so many insights on the brain science that I'm not bringing into this conversation that are incredibly valuable for those of us who find ourselves in conflicts, whether it's the day-to-day difficult conversation with a family member or a boss or a supervisor, or more than that. And to kind of oversimplify the way our brains work. And this is very much oversimplification, although my co-author, Dr. Salinas, tells me, I ran the slide by him, he called it acceptable. So for those of you who are brain scientists, you're going to have to give me a pass on this, right? But our brain kind of operates on these two levels, the conscious level that's making like, oh, I need to be on this call at 5 p.m. Eastern or wherever you are, 2 p.m. West Coast, right? And then there's kind of the hidden mind that we're not making conscious decisions. And when things are going well, we're making these really good decisions. But in conflict, suddenly someone says something that operates as a trigger. And that trigger actually releases real chemicals. Like physiologically, our brains change. Cortisol, adrenaline, right? And those chemicals actually rush into the conscious part of our mind. And during that period of time, which can be like 5 to 20 minutes, we are susceptible to saying all sorts of like really unhelpful things. So this is called limbic irritability. And the question, of course, is how do we handle that? And a pause can really help, like a do no harm. Do not hit reply to all. But what some of the science shows us actually is that being able to take some period of time, like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, and then to mindfully name to ourselves what it is we're feeling actually changes what's going on in our brain, because our brain has a neuroplasticity to it. So Matt Lieberman at UCLA calls this affective labeling, that when we name it to ourselves, the amount of time it takes for us to move from the amygdala, which is the kind of emotional center, to the frontal lobe actually gets reduced. So that piece is really important. And right, and in a Catholic tradition, right, there's prayer. I just want to say before I move on, right? Sometimes, like for me, I have a Marian devotion, just like some like prayer to Mary, right, can be really powerful. The second piece, of course, is really deep listening, which I want to distinguish from just plain old listening. So there are these behaviors of listening, and if you do a training in listening, you'll get some version of paraphrase, acquire knowledge, emotion. They're really important. However, if you just do the behaviors without more, you will come across as condescending, fake, and annoying. And we all have probably been on the other side of somebody who's doing the behaviors, but they don't mean it. So I want to do a little exercise here. For this exercise, I can't see you all, but I'm going to ask you to virtually raise your hand. And I'm going to just ask you to count the number of times you see the letter F on this slide, ignoring the conflict resilience cover down there. I want you to ignore that. So the number of times you see the letter F. And I'm going to give you just about 30 seconds to do that. And when you're done counting, in fact, when you're 90% sure you've counted correctly, just write on a piece of paper or make a mental note of the number of times you've counted the letter F as in Frank. There. Hope you're all counting. Okay, I'm going to give you just about 10 more seconds. Okay, So now I'm going to ask those of you who can do this to please take out a smartphone and scan that QR code. And you should have a question popping up that asks you how many times did the letter F appear on the PowerPoint slide? And then just find the correct answer and hit submit. I'll keep this QR code. I'm going to wait until we get a decent number of responses. So I have 10 responses so far, but since there's 148 of you here, I'm going to wait a little bit more. Okay, I'm just going to wait a little bit more. I have 24 responses. You're a very tech-savvy group. I'm impressed. I've given versions of this talk in different places. And sometimes when you do it with students, it's like they're very quick. When you sometimes do it with groups who are in different generations, it could take a little longer. Okay, we have 45 responses. So I think I'm going to share the screen. Keep voting. You keep on voting. But just for the purposes of our exercise, I'm going to share the screen. And we have 50 responses so far. Very wide range of, if you see me looking over there, I'm looking at my other screen. Can you all see it, Ellen? Can you see the, yeah. So one day, Ellen and Miles, whatever else could be said about the readers of Commonweal, you have done an amazing job of recruiting an incredibly diverse set of counters. So congratulations. Great. So I'm going to stop the share. I see clearly number 10 wins here, but there's a wide range. Beside the share, I'm going to ask you, though, to stay, please do me a favor, and stay on Mentimeter, because you should have a new question popping up. And if things are working, the new question is asking you, are you still reasonably certain you counted accurately? Are you reasonably certain you counted accurately? Yes or no? And remember, this is totally anonymous. Yes or no? Okay, I have 33 responses so far, but I had 58 on the other one, so I'm going to wait a second. Okay, I think the time has come for me to share the responses, so I'm going to do that. Give me 1 second. Okay. All right. So we have a reasonably confident group here. This would be, by the way, if it were an election, it would be a landslide for yes. I find this to be incredibly interesting because I asked you to count the number of times the letter F, right? And I said about 90% correct. 58 of you responded. Only 2 of you were correct because there are in fact 16 Fs on that screen. I then showed you the diversity, and I could do this again, the diversity of the responses of your colleagues, which might have sown some doubt, but it didn't sow too much doubt because, oh, no, I'm still right. I'm still right. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you, right, is because it is so unlike most conflicts. In most conflicts, it's hardly ever the case that everything that we're fighting about, we were all there for 100% of it. And that the thing we're fighting about is as objectively true as counting the letter of a F. And yet most of us go in with the idea that I'm right and you're wrong and we have no curiosity. And I just want to say that is a really perilous way to enter any kind of genuine conversation at all. I'm sure some of you are like, please just show me the 16. Let me just make sure I'm sharing. Am I sharing? Yeah, okay. I am sharing the slides now, right? Yeah, so let me just quickly, because I'm sure people want to know. Let's get to it. Here are the 16 Fs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16 Fs. So all of this is just to suggest, by the way, don't feel badly. This is a group that I did in December of 2023, 220 people. Only 11 of them got it right. That's like less than 0.5%. This is a really interesting one. So this is a group of 50 participants I did in October 2023. 0%, so that's not a typo, like 0 of the people got it right. Nonetheless, 75% of them thought that they were still right, even though 0 of them got it right. And I say this with deep, deep respect and admiration for Roman Catholic priests, but this group was all priests. This group here. So all of this is to say, right, the work of being a good listener is actually less about the behaviors and more about the stance. Finding some way to be curious, some way to say, maybe I don't have all the truth. Because if you are listening as an act of condescension or kindness, as opposed from a place of genuine curiosity, it will not land. On the assertive piece, you want to start with listening because it helps you frame what you'll assert about. And then avoid things like globalizations. You never bring the garbage out. You've never said a helpful thing in this workplace, right? And speaking from your own perspective. Last thing I want to say, and we spend about 2 chapters on this. I was like really not doing any justice. But I think it's really important for especially our life as Catholics. Because one of the things I often hear is we want to be a listening church. But we can only be a listening church if we create the kind of containers that make it safe and low risk for people to actually bring their stories forward. If bringing your story forward and saying the wrong things means that you won't get re-invited back to something, or you're put out of a ministerial opportunity, or you're looked judged upon, you're not going to do that. And so we talk a lot about how do we build conflict resilient containers. There's lots of steps to this. Setting up some shared norms or ground rules. These are just some sample ones. About 8 or 9 years ago, working in the Archdiocese of Boston, I had the chance to put together some dialogues between clergy and disaffected Catholics. These are some ground rules we put together. We were very careful about who we curated and brought into the room. And then we set up some shared norms that people could agree to. But if we don't set up the space right, then people aren't going to feel like they can do the work. So there's a lot more I could say, but I really want to leave time for conversation and questions. So I'm going to stop the share now, and hopefully I've piqued your curiosity a little bit, and I'll turn it over to Ellen.
Bob, thank you so much. That was really amazing. I have so much to say. Like I want to just jump right into a dialogue with you, but it doesn't help that I'm actually just a big fan. Like I'm reading the book, have notes all over it. So that's my starting point here is that the presentation itself really great, and also just the tip of the iceberg. Like you said, there's so much in here. And part of what we wanted to do in today's conversation wasn't just to think about what conflict resilience is, which to me was a really refreshing new term to introduce. It's a term that I find really helpful because it sort of, well, I saw myself in a lot of it was a little bit therapeutic. I won't get into it. We won't do any personal therapy here, not live at least, but I found it a really helpful term because it so accurately describes not only interpersonal relationships where there's sometimes avoidance, sometimes placating, sometimes, I'm all for conflict and it doesn't feel intimidating at all, but to actually go through a process not only of learning what this skill is, but then trying to figure out why it shows up in some places, it's harder in other contexts of your life, and then thinking about it at scales like in society or in the church. So I wanted to think a little bit more about the church and less about how I manage conflict with my immediate family. I mean, for the sake of today's conversation. And I had one small bad idea, which was that I just pick a fight with you and then we do a live conversation. We use the skills
We can
ourselves.
model it.
Yeah, we just model it. You don't see it coming, but no, that's not the plan either. So I wanted to think about not just conflict resilience, but also bring it specifically into the context of the synod. And I've heard synodality described in myriad ways, sometimes as a process, sometimes as a posture, sometimes as a kind of methodology. And I think too that synodality is a way of understanding what this season of evangelization must look like in the life of the church. By that, I mean, we've had seasons of evangelization that have looked other ways. They've looked more aggressive. In the early 90s, it was about pizza parties and guitar masses. There was times when war was how evangelization looked. I think synodality is the season we're in for what the gospel invitation can look like. And that to me is really interesting because it strikes me as perfectly suited as a response to polarization. It's an effort to lead with listening rather than this kind of pre-rehearsed script about what I and others must certainly already believe or conclude. So that's certainly not, the textbook definition of synodality, but it's part of what I think is embedded in the term. In Fratelli Tutti, his writing on fraternity, Pope Francis writes that, quote, "Together we can seek the truth in dialogue, in relaxed conversation, or in passionate debate." And I love this. I love that in addition to Francis's vision and in your book, there's no desire to sidestep or placate. Debate, in addition to dialogue, is an exercise worth undertaking. And Pope Francis goes on saying, fraternity is born not only of a climate of respect for individual liberties, or even of a certain administratively guaranteed equality. Fraternity necessarily calls for something greater, which in turn enhances freedom and equality. What happens when fraternity is not consciously cultivated, when there is a lack of political will to promote it through education in fraternity, through dialogue, and through the recognition of the values of reciprocity and mutual enrichment, then liberty becomes nothing more than a condition for living as we will, completely free to choose to whom or what we belong, and simply possess or exploit. This shallow understanding has little to do with the richness of liberty, directed all to love. There's a long quote, but I think it's worth in full to say that part of what we get when we can exchange is not just fraternity, but the fruits of fraternity. And that right now, part of your experience, even dating back to, these early seminars at Harvard, was this inability that's costing us more than just comfort in the moment. It's costing us the richness of life together in society, in fraternity with each other. To undertake true dialogue, the kind that avoids caricature and mockery when real disagreement arises, the justified kind, the kind that listens without rehearsing its next response, the kind open to long, spacious, and nuanced conversations rather than really reductive bullet points or clickbait summaries, the kind willing to be wrong, that kind of dialogue is at the basis of our freedom and equality as a society and as a church. And I think that interestingly, and in Fratelli Tutti, this is in here too, this kind of dialogue assumes a knowledge of self, which you start to get at about the halfway point of this book. There's chapter 4 is called Embracing Your Negotiation Within, the self as the starting point for conflict resilience. This sensibility that's expressed by Francis is also not new to Commonweal. It's found deep in our own sense of mission and purpose, and we have written at times that society acquires its shape and meaning through this interplay of religion, politics, and culture, which is why we need places like Commonweal and other places as well for sharing ideas and beliefs in a spirit of authentic and honest exchange. It's how we get to know each other, listen to each other, and improve our knowledge of ourselves and the world around us. So a sort of concluding thought, and this is just sort of my natural response, not only to the book and to your presentation, but to the idea of synodality in general and what role it plays, what role conflict resilience plays when it comes to synodality. I'll sort of wrap up my own thinking here, but then I'll have a couple of questions for you that I'll pose. And then I'll also mention to the group, and I think Miles said this at the start too, we're happy to have some time for questions from all of you as well. So there is an open box, a Q&A box. If you want to throw a question in, we have our hosts monitoring, and Bob can pick some out, or Miles, and we'd love to hear from you too. But I'll wrap up by saying this. I'm really thrilled and intrigued by the work of conflict resilience when it comes to synodality in the church. And I'm especially curious about what you called, and I think I got this right, I jotted it down when you said it just now, a human and leadership issue. The ability to endure discomfort, the discomfort of conflict. Because I see this particularly human and leadership oriented skill set at work in our early church. I think our church was founded on it, in fact. I sometimes remark in my own presentations that we have been really good. We, the kind of Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church, have been very good at conflict all along. Tension and disagreement should be part of our expectation for such a vast and varied church. Our goal has always been unity, not uniformity, in the sort of theological way of framing it. And I think this message gets lost sometimes. But at our start, it's hard for me to lose sight of the fact that we had two founding, churchmen who were in early, passionate, serious, absolutely devoted disagreement with each other about the decisions of the early church. Peter and Paul had different versions for what expressions and experiences of faith counted, which I think is an interesting thing because it strikes me as still what is up for debate in many circles. And we've been having these same debates now. We can stand to sort of relax, I think, some of the obsessions around what gets used, terms like peacefulness or resolution or even problem solving was one thing you said. That's not necessarily even the goal. What our goal ought to be is enduring discomfort, or at least that's one takeaway that I took from this. And I look to Peter and Paul as two people who were like, well, I got stakes in the ground. I dug my heels in. So let's do this debate, not shy away from it, which I enjoyed very much. So that's sort of a first round of response to, there's so many other things I could have said and maybe want to, but I'm really interested in this idea of conflict resilience and this idea of synodality. If you have any thoughts on that right away, please chime in. Otherwise, I can also get to some questions and we'll get to more from the group too.
Yeah, no, thank you there's so many, you have sparked many different ways I could go, which could mean that we get no questions. There's a few,
We'll just stay here.
We'll just stay here. A few things though, I think some things I would want to double click on, and then maybe some things maybe I would wonder about.
Yeah, or nuance,
yeah. So the double clicking on, right, to me is that just from the earliest church, right, conflict has been a part of how we relate and engage with each other and also discover what is right and true. And the Peter and Paul example, but even the councils, right? The councils are these ways that we can bring and work out differences, right? And I think the other thing that I would just also agree with is that there's a way in which, our church is a capacious one. It's one of the things that makes me very drawn to the church in terms of spirituality, forms of worship, the way in which we encounter God, and that we have allowed as Catholics so much space for. I think the thing I wonder about, or maybe not so sure and particularly in this moment, I think there's a tension right now about whether we're doing conflict particularly well. And maybe this also comes from, I think Cardinal Bernardine was very visionary when he started the Catholic Common Ground Initiative, right?
Yeah.
He saw that if we didn't start to figure out how do we talk about things that were not supposed to be talked about, that we would end up in a bad place. And I think that there still is a powerful force in the church that says, I remember actually giving a talk, this might even be in the book, at a big conference where there were bishops and having somebody say to me, but Bob, if we engage on this topic, we give this legitimacy that it's not deserving of legitimacy. And that to me is still a stream in our church. I think the other thing that I see at a more parish level often, and I think this is not exclusive to Catholics, but certainly is there, is that if there's conflict, it means someone has said or done something wrong. I'm not thinking about it the right way, and I don't want to put that forward because then people will think something bad of me or bad of them. And that thread, I think, is comes not from the Spirit, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know what your reaction to that is, Ellen. Yeah.
No, I think those are both really good points. Well, my feeling to both of those observations is agreement in the immediate, that my sense is that it's true we're not very good at conflict, and that things like chiming in or disagreeing or even posing questions are viewed as like doubt casting. Like it's not, they're perceived as skeptical or not, and slightly unwelcome, at least unless a church space has been really, really thoughtful about cultivating a different kind of environment.
Yeah.
This
And I
actually
think oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, it leads me to my first question. I also think we have a handful in the chat, so I might
Yeah, I
just
could see
ask
that. Oh my
one
gosh.
and then see what the group is thinking about. My question is actually about if spaces or situations where it doesn't feel like resolution is even possible. So obviously the book is about resilience, not resolution, which I really appreciate. But there's a few vignettes in the book that deal with interlocutors who experience conflict differently. In one instance, there's a brother and a sister of different political persuasions, and they're having a hard time talking about a social issue because the sister perceives the brother as wanting to kind of needle her, and the brother thinks she's giving up because she just doesn't actually have any stakes in the thing. And in an ideal world, they articulate that they have different approaches to the dialogue, and then they work it out and they have fruitful discussions from there on, even if they don't change each other's minds. But what about the instances when somebody's truly not acting in good faith? That is to say, what do we make of individuals or groups, because I do think this is true in groups, who benefit by the breakdown of conversation or who have an interest in keeping people divided? And I won't add layers of, let's say hypothetically those groups exist or those
Yeah.
individuals. Is
Yeah.
there a different kind of response or a time you walk away at a certain point when experiencing conflict with these folks?
Yeah, no, I love that question, and thank you. Because I think it's important to kind of put or articulate the kind of limits around
Mhm.
this, or maybe not the limits, but the judgment involved.
Sure.
Because the book and my idea of conflict resilience was very much born of this sense of this quality that we're losing that maybe didn't have a name.
Mm.
But I don't mean it to be misheard as at all times one should be conflict resilient and enter into all the difficult conversations all
Right.
the time. So how do we think about it? So first, I think what you said, Alan, is do I think that this other person or this other group can come from this from a place of good faith?
Mhm.
Which in the book and now I'm going to say I really want to distinguish from a place of skill, right? Those
Right.
are like they may not be good at it, but that's different from whether somehow you have the sense deep in their heart, like they if they could be accessed, they would want to at least try.
Yeah.
We don't ever 100% know that. And I think we err in our book on the side of, I mean, going back to the 16 Fs,
Mhm.
right? You may have decided there's 11 and you're right.
I got it wrong. I got
Yeah.
it wrong, and then I was confident about it. I'll just
Yeah,
confess.
yeah. And maybe not, right? I think the other thing that is really important that I want to say here is that I want to make a distinction between conflict resilience and putting yourself in the face of something that would be harmful
Yeah.
or a re-traumatization.
Yeah.
Discomfort, it's like, who's going to read this book? I'm like, yes, I'm in favor of discomfort.
Yeah.
But
Woohoo.
I just think
Yes,
we need
please.
discomfort,
Mhm.
like all hard things, right?
Oh yeah, like I'm
Invite
raising
discomfort.
my 3-year-old and my 6-year-old to say, yeah, I know, brushing your teeth, it's the worst, but
The
like we do
worst.
it. Like how there's plenty of times we endure discomfort
Right.
because we see the good immediately related to it.
Right, right. So that we're in favor of, but putting yourself in the face of harm or trauma, and we offer some diagnostic questions, and some clinical actual questions to help you think that through.
Right.
So I think the argument here, right, is not always and everywhere, but going back to what you said earlier and what I said at the beginning, it is a leadership skill. And
Mm.
as with all leadership skills, we don't deploy every single one in every single moment.
Mm.
But the mark of a leader is that it's in their repertoire.
Yeah.
And whether and I think that it's also really useful like in our families. And so those are all individual kinds of questions that I think we need to ask and explore. Part of why I think we tend, one of these, like in the book, we like talk a lot about the kind of quick excuses of why it's not worth it. I won't change them.
Mhm.
They're impossible. I'm too busy. And all of those things may be true. And also, they can be quite convenient excuses.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and that's where the brain science piece comes in, because if the escape is extremely easy, and it's easier now than ever,
Mhm.
even down at the parish level, like how many people go, 4 towns over to go to the
Yeah.
parish of their choice, right?
Right.
But if we can see what in the book we call the bigger, better offer,
Yep.
that the act of doing this is going to enhance connection, even if there's no
Yeah.
agreement.
Yeah.
Now there's a reason to enter into it.
Yep. I think, and that is bringing me right back to Fratelli Tutti. Like there are benefits beyond winning and to endure this. I see that Miles is back on, and Miles, maybe you have a few questions picked out for our last 10-ish minutes or so from the audience.
I do. Thank you. And Bob, thank you so much for, opening this discussion and sharing your great work. And Ellen too, thank you for facilitating the conversation. I do just want to say before we turn to the Q&A with the audience, I've had the privilege of kind of getting very different reads over the past couple of years of various states of this manuscript. And I think talking to Bob early on, it was very much what always resonated with me, particular about this project is it was both a profound cultural diagnostic and a much needed prescription for what ails us. And when Bob and I were talking about this book early on, it was very much like around the shared dinner table, family dinner table at Thanksgiving, within conversations we have with our neighbors, our communities, and kind of citizens. Bob and I never really talked about how it meant to the church, but it's been nice to see in this conversation and as the synod and synodality became more of a known process within Catholic circles, how this fit in so much within that, besides just being its own pillar of things, how conflict resilience, of where conflict resilience will kind of help people. So seeing it kind of come together and evolve, and this conversation kind of bringing it to the forefront of how this matters in our day-to-day life, and in really in the I think in our most intimate spaces, right, as Catholics and as family members. And it's been really great to kind of see in this conversation and what the book helps teaches us of how to be more present Catholics, more present citizens, more present partners, and really kind of entering into this kind of era of discipleship that Cardinal McElroy discussed in that clip. So I want to thank you very much for that, Bob.
Thank you, Miles.
I do see a number of questions that do kind of talk about kind of, they invite us to kind of drill down a little bit more into the specifics of conflict resilience best practices. And you just touched upon it in your last round of questions with Ellen, but one question was, are there quote unquote pseudo intellectuals in Bob's world? And how would you suggest we respond to this personality type? I would just say that in addition to pseudo intellectuals, I think it's really how you respond to disagreeable personalities or authorities or people who are half in and half out, who just want to kind of get done with it.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, and I think this is a little bit, if I look at a few of these other questions, right? It's kind of the how do I engage with either somebody who doesn't want to engage, or who's patronizing but doesn't really want to get into it. Um, and so I think I start always from a place of, can we suspend
Mhm.
the certainty about that?
Mm.
And is there something I can get curious about? So maybe, for example, can't get curious about their view on whether the Earth is round or flat, because I just really nothing. There's nothing and nothing they can tell me is going to make me think it's flat. Um, but can I be curious about how they came to see it that way? Can I be curious about what they think of people who think the world is round, or how do they operate in that world? Or I say this, right, because in order to be able to somehow test my assumption about their lack of interest, I have to first get curious about something. And if I'm not there yet, that's okay, right? One of the really important things in our book, sometimes we use these analogies, right? One of them is like if you want to get more fit, you don't start by running a marathon.
Mhm.
You start by like something simpler. And so if your tendency is to avoid or not engage in hard conversations, and maybe you have in your mind this really tough person, like identify a hard conversation where you have with someone who isn't so hard and start there.
Yeah.
I think just the other thing though I think about in this, right, is sometimes like for someone who maybe comes across like a battering ram. It is a stylistic difference. One of the things we talk about in our book, we have this idea of what we call conflict tolerance.
Mhm.
And we break it into two pieces, and one is conflict recognition. That is to say that, and you know, Miles, you know this well from conversations that we had with my co-author Joelle. We have really different conflict recognitions. I think because I was trained as a lawyer, I could be in something and I think it's really fun and we're disagreeing and it's and then I like on to the next conversation. I'm fine. Somebody
Mhm.
else, like my co-author, might be like, is this project gonna happen? I have sleepless nights. Like they think there was a big fight. And so raising your own awareness of what your recognition is, and sometimes the issue is that that person is just different. Now, that's not to say one is better or worse,
Mhm.
um, but maybe sometimes the thing to be negotiated or even
Mhm.
talked out in order to get into a conversation about an issue is the how of how you do it.
Yeah.
All of this, right, lastly, just is in the context of how important is this to you, right? You're not going to do this all the time, but if it's keeping you up at night,
Mhm.
and if it's haunting you for, you know, months and years, your decision to not have that hard conversation or set of conversations isn't necessarily serving the relationship. It's
Mhm.
just putting a slow kill on that relationship. And it's leaving you disappointing the side of yourself
Mhm.
that knows you have something to say.
Yeah.
And that's less than authentic. Um, and I think it's less than what we're called to be in relationship with each other. Um, and as church, we can't discern well when we're not putting our full stories and selves together
Mhm.
in conversation and in community.
Mhm.
Mm. It's a good follow-up question because, you know, I think when y- say you're within a parish setting or trying to put into effect the Synodal Church as Francis envisions it, you are kind of, the stakes are high. You're a member of this group. You want the church to reflect your values. You want your values to be reflected in the church and the parish and your community of, you know, neighbors and friends and family. When the stakes are that high for the individuals in a group, how do you kind of practice conflict resilience in the context of synodality, but also kind of recognizing that other people have the same stakes as you do, and their identity is so intertwined in the same community you think you're trying to advocate and advance?
Yeah, oh, this is such a hard question that I'm going to try to succinct, right? But I
Well, I
think
think
part of
it's an ongoing process, right?
it is an ongoing
Yeah.
process, right? And part of like, you know, this is something we kind of address towards the end of our book. We talk about trying to create conflict resilient greenhouses. The
Mhm.
analogy we use is, right, you could have like some great seed that's going to make whatever the most beautiful sunflower. And if you'd like plant it outside on the in Boston where I live in January, it might not go so well for you, right?
Mhm.
We have to have a greenhouse that supports it. And I think this is where, I mean, this is where, right, Pope Francis's invitation is so powerful. And some of the choices, the way he set up conversations at
Mhm.
those synodal meetings, right? With a set of shared expectations and ground rules and go arounds and even the geography of it. That is to say that if we want people to do this, one piece is they have to do their own work. Another piece is we have to provide some just capacity building. It doesn't come
Mhm.
naturally. I mean, I teach and write about this stuff, and anyone who knows me knows that there's some days when I am really, really rotten at it. But third, we have to do some work to create the conditions to make it a bit easier. And, it's been interesting for me as I've gotten a chance to talk in some parishes and I do some work training pastors in different contexts. And there are places where bishops and parish and pastors and pastoral councils have done a lot of work to really promote that spirit of synodality, and some places where it feels a little, honestly, more like check the box. And if it's check the box, you're not going to get the result. It's going to be harder, at least, to produce those kinds of results.
One questioner has a great phrase, kind of how to discern a resilience imbalance, right? Where one party feels pressure to suppress more of the relational conflict to save the other party from facing or hearing the challenging call for dialogue and possible reconciliation. I see it as kind of the flip side of what you were just talking about. Like, how do you kind of give this book or the idea of conflict resilience to someone who is not quite there yet or doesn't think you're in conflict? Or how do you give it to your parish priest? How do you give it to your bishop, right? Where it's like, this is an invaluable tool that I think we need to thrive as a community.
Yeah, such a good question. I mean, it's so funny. This book called Difficult Conversations, of which many of probably people listening have heard of, came out when I was a law student. And I thought, oh gosh, like it's such a great book. How could you give this book to somebody like, here, it's called Difficult Conversations? I mean, hopefully this book doesn't have that level of like, oh wow. But I think the deeper part of this question is an appreciation that well, of a number of things, right? I think each of us probably has just a different natural capacity to do some of this work and a different natural willingness. There's a story, one of the stories in the book is a grandson and his grandmother talking about different views about taking down statues, actually.
Mhm.
I think part of what is kind of interesting and tender there, and is that generationally, there are differences in people's just comfort with navigating emotional or identity kinds of conversations. So, I think part of what I would hope, right, is that, and this is, I think, is really important, is that we can all, wherever we are on this journey, and it is a journey, um, we can all grow. Um, Anyone, listening who thinks I'm just the ultimate avoider, I just can't do this. The more kind of willingness you are to be self-aware, to do some reflective work, like you'll improve.
Mhm.
On the other hand, if like you're like the world's mediator, you're going to be brought in to solve all the world conflicts. I'm sure you're great, but increasing your own awareness, finding some stretch places, and being self-reflective do create opportunities to grow. And I think that it's important um, to manage our own expectations as we go into this, right? I gave a talk today earlier, and someone's like, "Well, I really," like, they had already read the book. They're like, I really like the book, but I don't like your scripts. Your scripts in the book are so unrealistic." Okay, And the point like, I actually don't disagree with that. I mean, the
Right.
scripts are there to give a model, but the notion you can script the conversation is wrong. And here's I think the invitation to a conflict resilient conversation. The beauty of doing the same conversation you had all the time in the past is that as painful, as awful as it is, you know how it ends.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The challenge here is we're going to do something different. And it might be rough, but it also can be generative and it also can be connecting. Because it isn't until that first moment when we kind of say no or say we see it differently that all of the other yeses have some actual meaning to them. There's some meat to the bones. And I think that's the kind of invitation to me of conflict resilience.
Mm.
I think
I
that's so
was,
helpful. And
go ahead, Ellen. I'm sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna say, I think that's so helpful. And I also think that's a perfect note to end on, because it totally embraces what the spirit and the tenor of the book is. And I've been reviewing some of the questions in the chat, and my response, which is the less educated one, is like, buy the book. Like, no, there's an answer to that question. You know, like different levels of comfort, different tones, different, like these things are, it's a really practical book that's also aspirational. So I'm very grateful for it. And I also think there's a lot more to be said. We started a few minutes after the hour, and so we wanted to make sure everybody got a full hour of Bob's presentation, but I think we're at about that time. So I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions. There was a few good ones remaining, but Miles, if you have any other remarks, I just had to make a pitch for the book mostly.
Well, I just wanted to say very quickly, I was at Bob's presentation on Sunday night at a local parish near Lincoln Center. And you said something I had never heard before, but a colleague described the book as it's a book about speaking up, which, you know, again, you and I never really thought about because we talk so much about like deep listening and kind of thing. But I think it's like, it's a book about speaking up, but also knowing who you are and the values you want to kind of defend. And you're speaking up not to be proven right or to drown someone out, but it's to share your full self and to be fully present with someone that you care about or in a relationship with, whether it's platonic, romantic, or paternal. It's just like, these are the environments that we're going to be in, increasingly so, you know, in this current climate of kind of distrust and conflict. There's no other way around it. So like, how do you start to listen to people, but speak up for the values that you hold dear without looking for resolution, finding that peace of mind, but also just kind of knowing that like, we are here to do more than simply agree to disagree because we are both invested in this. So let's figure out a way to kind of engage in this type of, you know, again, this discipleship, for lack of a better term. And that to me has kind of really resonated, and what I kind of am going to be thinking about in the coming months as we kind of negotiate the news, our environments, as the Synod returns to the parish level. How do we kind of be present and be heard and be willing to listen to other people? So I just want to thank Bob and Ellen for facilitating this conversation. I also want to thank Gabrielle Wilkie, our sorry, I always mess up your title, our marketing director and audience development director, for really kind of spearheading this event tonight. And I want to thank everyone for participating, for your great questions, and for your continued support of Commonweal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me too. This is a real delight. And so I really appreciate it. And just a blessed Holy Week to everyone as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks,
Thank you
Bob.
all.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.